Zombie runner, Bobby Shanes, effectively wild.
Joey Meneses,
No.
walk-off 3-run digger.
Stop it.
Walk-off 3-run shot.
Oh my God.
Meg, he's the best player in baseball.
Effectively wild.
Hello and welcome to episode 2427 of Effectively Wild, a baseball podcast from FanGraphs presented by our Patreon supporters. I am Ben Lindbergh of The Ringer, joined by Meg Rowley of FanGraphs. Hello, Meg.
Oh, hello.
We will be joined shortly by one of said Patreon supporters, John Norton, one of our top-tier supporters, who will join us in a bit to answer some emails from other listeners. Before we get to him, though, we have two transactions to discuss.
Yeah.
And as is often the case this offseason, they both involve acquisitions by American League East teams. So one was the Yankees, who finally awakened from their offseason slumber. Brian Cashman has been disturbed from his hibernation and has made a trade with the Marlins for starting pitcher Ryan Weathers. And the Red Sox have responded to that acquisition. Probably not actually a response to that acquisition, but they did make their own acquisition subsequently. They signed Ranger Suarez, free agent, to a 5-year deal worth $130 million. So it's kind of in keeping with a lot of what we've seen this offseason in the sense of AL East teams that were already good getting better, but it is out of step with what we've seen in that, hey, the Yankees actually did something. And the Red Sox signed a free agent because they had not done that. They had made multiple trades and major trades, but they had not signed any free agent at all this offseason. I think they were the last team to sign a free agent this offseason. And they haven't really signed a free agent to a multi-year deal, like a legitimate multi-year deal, not sort of a make-good pitcher coming off an injury kind of deal. At least during the Breslow years, right? And they have sort of shown a reluctance to sign pitchers in particular to long-term deals, and especially guys who are older than Ranger Suarez is. Maybe his relative youth is what made them go to 5 years for him. Not that that's that long, but he's only 30. Anyway, I guess we can take these in the order in which they were consummated. What do you make of the Marlins dealing yet another starter after trading Edward Cabrera to the Cubs, whom the Yankees were also interested in acquiring? And I guess those talks perhaps paid dividends and that they had already been discussing a different starting pitcher. And so maybe that led to the Ryan Weathers move when Cabrera went to Chicago.
I think that, boy, they sure have a lot of confidence in the depth that they have. That tends to be my thought for a lot of these. Although I will say, when evaluating that depth, obviously useful to think about not only the guys who they have at the big league level right now, but the guys who they might have at the big league level in the near term. So, we're all familiar with the Sandy Alcantara's and the Yuri Perez's and Max Meyer and Braxton Garrett and Jansen Junk, who I just love saying Jansen Junk.
That's the best.
But, as Bauman noted in the Cabrera trade write-up, as Carrie noted in her write-up of this deal, like Thomas White and Robbie Snelling are sort of lurking. And it seems like this is maybe, if you're those guys, you have to be thrilled, right? Because the odds that they get through a season without those guys getting significant time in the majors in 2026 seem quite low. I want this to end up being a move that makes the Yankees look really smart, because it's just been hard to know what to make of Weathers in the course of his major league career, because he's been hurt for a lot of it. But he seems to be adaptable. He's made some changes. He sort of, in between IL stints last year, kind of showed some improved stuff, even if the stats didn't quite line up with what you might expect based on the underlying quality of his pitches. So I think that Weathers is exciting. And, I guess you got to have something to do to pass the time before you finally come to terms with Cody Bellinger. So
yeah,
that seems okay. It's interesting from the Marlins perspective because, and I'm not saying anything particularly revelatory here, but when they moved Cabrera, they went and got a guy who's I think almost certain to be on their opening day roster, right? Like they prioritize sort of a big league ready corner guy in Owen Casey, and he's had big league time. This is a more like volume based approach with lower level guys who are much further away from the majors. And, you know, I think that when Brendan looked at that group of guys to give Curie notes, he was sort of underwhelmed, like a bunch of bench pieces. But maybe you hit on one of those guys and he sort of exceeds expectations, or you have an idea in mind for how to better optimize his swing or what have you. So it's interesting to see them in sort of back-to-back moves, deploying multiple strategies as a way of seemingly bolstering the big league roster at the same time that they're like reinforcing the minor league system. So that part's interesting to me.
Yeah, as I expressed when we talked about the Cabrera trades, I remain skeptical about the Marlins until proven otherwise, I guess, that this isn't just sort of the endless cycling through players who are even approaching arbitration, let alone free agency, with an eye towards the future and just staying on that treadmill forever, essentially, and never really getting to the promised land, except the couple times that they did, of course, but then they immediately disassembled themselves. So I don't know. I guess I want to have some faith in the current Marlins decision makers that they have a plan here, and just by stockpiling prospects, they will sift through them and they will get some gold, and that they think maybe they have a strength when it comes to pitching. And, they certainly are subtracting from that surplus. But as you said, they do have major league arms that are ready to substitute for them. So okay, I guess I see the vision, but until we see the vision actually come to fruition long term for more than a year at a time, really, for this franchise, it's hard to have any faith if you're a fan. You've seen so many generations of promising players be moved, and just prospects coming back, cheaper players, not coincidentally. And then as soon as they get good and start to make money, they're off to another team too. So maybe this time will be different, but maybe not. So for the Yankees, this trade goes down 30 years after the trade of David Weathers, father of Ryan Weathers, from the Marlins to the Yankees. And I am quite confident that Ryan Weathers will outperform his father for the Yankees, because David Weathers' career for the Yankees amounted to 26 and a third innings with a 9.57 ERA, more walks than strikeouts. That's a negative 1.0 baseball reference WAR, which is pretty impressive in that amount of playing time. So I think that he will be better than that. By the way, David Weathers had a 19-year big league career. That's impressive to me. I would have taken the under on that. He certainly was a staple of my youth in baseball, but still, 19 years, that's long. But his time with the Yankees, not his most distinguished stint. So Weathers has upside, like he's got stuff, and he's made some upgrades to his repertoire, seemingly. Although then he also continued to break a bit. And so I never know, like you could look at his stuff last season and dream on what he could do in a full healthy season with what he was throwing, but then did what he was throwing and he added a slider, right? And he had just another tick on his fastball and everything. And who knows if, doing those things, throwing harder, contributed to his being a bit breakable, but he's been a bit breakable for a while. So it's one of those weird situations where they needed rotation depth, and they're adding a guy who is not really the provider of depth. He's kind of the type who tests your depth more than anything, right? So I guess the more of those guys you amass, the better. But they're looking at entering the season with Garrett Cole and Carlos Rodon still recovering from surgery, and you hope that they'll be back at some point. And I guess Clark Schmidt, too, who had internal brace repair. So you're down a few starters, and you hope you'll get reinforcements at some point during the season. And so I guess you hope that Fried and Schlittler and Warren and Weathers and Heel can get you through things until your other guys get back. And then, maybe if everyone's healthy, which is never the case, then you could always consider moving someone to the bullpen. I'm sure Weathers would probably be a lights out reliever if they ever wanted to try him that way, but I'm sure they'd like to have him be a starter. And it's kind of an upside play, I guess. Like, I don't know if it'll satisfy Yankees fans. So what would? But I think in the absence of some major signing, then it's like we got the second most desirable Marlins starter, maybe. You could make a case that Weathers will be better than Cabrera. That's possible, but that probably wouldn't be the baseline projection. So it's like we missed out on, other top starters who got traded. We didn't get Freddie Peralta, or at least they haven't. And so we settled for the Marlins starter that the Cubs didn't get. So,
Right.
How much does that appease the fan base? But I don't mind the move at all in isolation. I think given what they surrendered in exchange for Weathers, even if he continued to be a pretty effective, if sporadically available starter, that might well work out for them because he's been, pretty good in the innings that he has pitched over the past couple seasons. And there's potential for him to be even better on an inning per inning basis or to actually qualify for the ERA title for once. I mean, even Ranger Suarez, who we'll talk about in a second, hasn't qualified for the ERA title in his career, and he just got a $130 million deal. So that's not a prerequisite to be a successful, coveted starting pitcher these days. I'm just saying, it's hardly a slam dunk move like we did it, mission accomplished, off season's a success, but it's a start. Now, you don't want your off season to essentially start in mid-January, but it's better than never having it start.
Right.
And, if they sign Bellinger and maybe there are other moves that they have up their sleeve here, they could just procrastinate and still get their work done, because who among us hasn't done that?
Right. I mean, on the one hand, better to have your business resolved earlier. On the other hand, still plenty of brisk business to do out there, right? So it's not like it's really bitten them so far.
And he's under team control for a few years. Yeah. So, it's always good to have someone like that. Although, again, that makes me more skeptical of the Marlins trading these guys who, if they are theoretically close to contention, could have helped them contend in theory. Right. But yeah, to pry Weathers away and not have to give up any of your top prospects, that's probably pretty nifty.
Yeah, I think that's a good bit of work if it's all just lower level dudes. So
gave up a couple outfielders, a couple infielders, 2 Dylans, though different Dylan spellings. There's Dylan Lewis, the Dillon, and there's the Dylan Jaso, Dylan.
Yeah.
And you recently expressed some desire for people to get on the same page when it comes to the spellings of same-sounding names. But Marlins doubling down on Dylans here. So that's one move, and we'll see whether that's a precursor to additional Yankees transactions and acquisitions. The Red Sox, though, they have maybe kind of capped off a successful offseason. I mean, they may well not be done even after signing Ranger Suarez, but this is a pretty, I think, impressive investment on their part because they didn't necessarily need a starting pitcher, because I think before they made this move, they had the best projected rotation according to the FanGraphs depth charts. And now they do by even more. And this is a really impressive group, because they've got Garrett Crochet at the top, plus Gray and Suarez both acquired this offseason. And then you're looking at Brian Bayo as, a fourth starter, Johan Oviedo, whom they also acquired this offseason, your fifth starter or something. And then they go like 10 deep with guys who would be viable back of the rotation pitchers, at least.
Yeah.
Like, they have Patrick Sandoval, they have Peyton Tolley and Connolly Early, who impressed at times last year. They have Cutter Crawford, they got Kyle Harrison. So the old maxim that I coined about how you can never have enough pitching, I think they are really ensuring that they might actually have enough pitching. Famous last words, but that's a nice change, because in recent seasons, they have not had enough pitching, especially like top of the rotation type pitching, for stretches of even last season. It was like Crochet's incredible, but then what? And now it's solid top to bottom.
It's so interesting to watch the Red Sox and the Cubs do this thing where they're like, well, what if we just accumulate a bunch of guys at basically the same position and then we'll just have a crazy store of them to deal from, right? Like, they're not going to, I understand you can never have too much pitching, whatever, but they have so many guys. They have so many guys. I have to imagine that they do some sort of consolidation trade. And they could decide not to do that and just be like, hey, this is the offseason, we're spending big money, and still go sign Bo Bichette, right? But if they don't, and Bo Bichette goes to the Phillies, well, then the Phillies have an infield surplus. And hey, Ranger Suarez just signed with the Red Sox, so maybe you need a starter. So just do a little swappity-do, like it's so, or call the Cubs and be like, hey, Alex Bregman, he's there now. What do you think about some of our guys? You need a dude. Meg and Ben keep saying you need a dude. You have some interesting arms. We like some of your guys, but Meg and Ben keep saying you need a dude. And we got dudes, and we need an infield dude. So maybe we do some little business about one of our dudes for one of your infield dudes.
And it's funny because, last time we talked about the Bregman signing and what this means for the Red Sox, and we talked about the Cubs and should they deal from an infield surplus or should they just hold their hand and profit, which I was in favor of. But if they are going to trade Horner or Shaw or someone, then suddenly the Red Sox seem like sort of a logical destination, possibly. So instead of getting Bregman, having him leave and go to the Cubs, maybe then they end up with one of the people that Bregman displaced in Chicago. Who knows? We'll see. But the primary takeaway, I guess, for me is that last time, even when we talked about the Red Sox, we were talking about how good they are and the young guys they have and the extensions they've signed some of them to and everything. But they hadn't really made a splash in free agency in a while. And now they have done that. So kudos to them.
Kudos to them, and I really like Ranger Suarez. I really like watching him pitch.
Yeah.
And so I'm glad he got paid because he's fun to watch. And it's nice when the guys who are fun to watch get paid. And, because he's been hurt at various stretches and wasn't always a full-time starter, like, he hasn't made a ton of money either. That's nice for him to go make some money. And now, I mean, look, we talked about how they have all of these names, and I'm sure that their rotation will have feature more than 5 guys over the course of an entire season. But it's just a much higher caliber front to back, right? Like, they've had some of the names that you mentioned, like Peo's been there, and they've had guys, and they haven't really grabbed like that 2-3 spot, and so they went and got a guy who's sort of an unquestioned 2 or 3, depending on how you feel about Gray. So
this worked out well for me in the effectively wild free agent contracts over/under draft. I did have the over on Suarez at 115, which was MLB Trade Rumors projection, but it was similar to what Ben Clemens had and what the FanGraphs crowdsourced had.
Ben's was bang on. I think he got
right.
Years
he nailed
end
it.
And AAV spot on.
Yeah, so this just seemed like a reasonable deal.
Yeah, Zips was like, that's about what I'd give him. I think it was off by like, $5-6 million. So it seems like they kind of dialed it in just right.
And I don't know whether the Phillies, now having lost Suarez, whether they repurpose some of that money and they go after Bichette or someone else. Yeah, there's this little like musical chairs sort of situation happening with a limited number of teams here, it seems. And Suarez, he is not the typical power pitcher profile, that's for sure, that teams are often looking for. But I see some people will use the phrase smoke and mirrors, which I think implies that it's unsustainable, maybe. It's not smoke and mirrors. There's definitely illusion and deception and everything going on there, but I think it's a sustainable smoke and mirrors. He makes it work. He fools hitters, and you can kind of identify how he does it. And I know I saw a lot of people say, the Red Sox, they finally splurged on a free agent, and it's a lefty pitcher, kind of a crafty lefty to boot in Fenway, and that doesn't fit the typical profile. he's almost too young to be a crafty lefty, but he's crafty beyond his years. He's precocious in the craftiness department. And I think he could be fine in Fenway because, we probably overrate park effects sometimes, but also he mostly keeps the ball on the ground in most seasons, and he does not surrender a lot of pulled fly balls to righties that could just hammer off or over the monster, even though you'd think that it would be easy to get around on his stuff because, he throws like 90-91. And I remember earlier this offseason, I think when Kyle Hendricks retired, we bantered a bit about, is he the last of his kind? And will there be another Kyle Hendricks? And how would that pitcher get developed? And Hendricks is a righty and Suarez is a lefty. So he's not exactly the heir to Kyle Hendricks's, finesse pitcher throne, but he sort of is that kind of pitcher. He just has like pinpoint command and manages to get a decent number of strikeouts, even though he doesn't get a lot of whiffs. He's not getting tons of swings and misses, but he gets called strikes. Like he tunnels really well as best we can tell and hides the difference between his pitches and, has a separation between his fastball and his changeup, even though his fastball isn't that fast. And he just seemingly repeatably induces pretty weak contact. Not that he's like a huge ERA versus FIP guy. I mean, there's a little bit of a differential there where he's had lower ERAs than FIPs, but it's not a massive gap. But he doesn't walk anyone. He keeps the ball in the park.
Yeah.
He gets soft contact. He puts pitches where he wants them. He obviously has a track record of postseason success. Whenever he's been tasked with postseason starts, he has generally risen to the challenge. So, yeah, like I guess you could be wary of, if he's only 30 and he's throwing 90 now, then what does this look like a few years from now? And is there like a cliff where he loses a tick or two and suddenly it all falls apart? And it's kind of dependent on having some minimum threshold of speed that he is able to achieve. I guess that's possible. I guess there's collapse potential, but when it isn't there with any pitcher really. So he's been quite solid, and he's a really nice addition to that staff.
Yeah, I agree.
What's the best team in this division? I don't know, because you look at the FanGraphs team depth charts, and this is purely projected WAR, not taking into account schedule. Yes, and obviously all of these AL East teams will be beating up on each other, which will impact their records. But just in terms of talent, the Dodgers are on top. Then it's Blue Jays, Yankees, Braves, Mariners, Red Sox. So you have 3 AL East teams in the top 6, and then it goes Mets, Orioles. So half of the top 8 are AL East teams. I mean, it's like total powerhouse, and all of them, with the exception of the Yankees for the most part, have really been busy and aggressive and upgraded this offseason. So the Blue Jays maybe have sort of won the offseason, I guess, if we were to prematurely declare a winner, and they might not be done. But the Red Sox are right up there, neck and neck with them. The Orioles aren't far behind either. And each time I look at one of these rosters, especially the Blue Jays and the Red Sox, it's like whichever one I looked at last seems to me to be stronger and the favorite in this division. And I honestly don't know. I think they're both really strong teams, and the projections would have us believe that the Yankees are neck and neck with them.
Yeah, I think that, it's really nice to have an Aaron Judge. Helps a lot. But yeah, it's going to be, I think, a real knockdown, drag out, and in a way that isn't, it always projects well, the AL East. Like, there are very rarely years where, at least 3 of the teams aren't thought to be some of the best ones in the American League entering the season. But just in terms of the work that several of those clubs, not all of them, have done to bolster their rosters, it really does seem like it's going to be a doozy of a division. So
yeah, and the Red Sox, they have the young guys you could project further growth from, or at least more playing time, a full season of Roman Anthony. That's exciting. So even though there are still some question marks, and it seems like there's too much depth, which is it's a good problem to have, but you do kind of wait for the other shoe to drop, or is there some other move that just consolidates things? Right. And you could say that about the outfield too, because they have really 4 very viable major league outfielders, and there are only 3 outfield positions.
Famously.
And that's not even taking into account Yoshida, who, as I said the other day, just doesn't really seem to fit. And you know, even though he could maybe still hit, is maybe not their best option. But what do you even do with that outfield? How do you fit all those guys in? So they were kind of in a spot where it seemed like they would maybe want to trade a hitter for pitching. But then they signed Ranger Suarez, and so they don't really need to trade for pitching, right? And yet, it's almost like the virtue would be in freeing up playing time more than like actually upgrading weak spots, unless they were to get a good infielder who, you know, they could improve there, which is why people were maybe matchmaking them with Bregman or Bichette or whoever else. So I guess that's a possibility, but. Man, that's a strong, it's a strong roster.
It's a strong group. Yeah.
They project to have the 5th best bullpen right now, too. So find the weak spot. It's not particularly weak. That's going to be a heck of a race, really. And again, it's like the remaining top free agents on the market, largely linked to AL East teams, whether it's Tucker or Bellinger. There are AL East teams that are very much in the running, or Bichette for that matter. So I look forward to when the dust settles, and I do still hope to stat blast that somehow, just to see like how this stacks up to previous AL Easts, or just previous times that a division has dominated the offseason in terms of like accruing more net WAR than it has lost from the past season, something like that. I imagine the numbers would be pretty eye-opening. So I hope to have them for you all at some point. But now we have emails for you and an email answerer.
D'un podcast marrant. Il s'appelle effectively Wild. Otani, le stade place, le beef boys sont chouettes. Les invités dont c'est super. Une fête. La 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 la. La la la, effectivement sauvage. La la la, la la la, la la la, effectivement sauvage.
All right, we are joined now by top tier, trout tier Patreon supporter John Norton, who has been waiting patiently for his podcast appearance, and now it has arrived, as has he. Hello, John.
Hello. Hi, Ben. Hi, Meg.
Hi. And as you may know from past Patreon person appearances, I always lead off by asking what could have possibly possessed you to support us at this elite tier.
It had been my birthday, and I decided to treat myself by honoring my favorite podcast with a donation. And I think I've been listening to you guys for about 15 years now. Wow. I mean, at least the podcast itself. So.
Yeah, I guess we're not quite that old, but we're not.
Oh, really?
We're getting there. Yeah, it's, let's see, this year will be 14, I guess.
Wow.
So,
14. Okay, huh.
So, yeah, unless you were eavesdropping on our personal conversations before we started recording, then it hasn't quite gotten to 15, but we're not far from there.
Okay, maybe 13 years anyway.
Yeah.
I remember my son being very young when I was listening to it. Actually, it's kind of a funny story. He was like 2 years old or something, sitting in the back seat of the car, and I started playing. I started playing this podcast, and he asked, "Where's Ben?" I guess you were taking the day off. So.
Oh, I missed one. That was rare. Yeah, no wonder he was surprised back in those days. And now he must be just about a fully grown person, I guess.
Yeah, now he's 15.
Yeah. We're old, I guess, is the takeaway here.
Wow.
And so is this podcast. But as good as ever, I hope. And you're still with us after all these years, so we must be doing something right. Well, we appreciate your support. And glad that you decided to treat yourself with this podcast appearance and also treat us in the process. And since you were here from the start, were you a Baseball Prospectus reader at the time, or how did you stumble across Effectively Wild?
I think I found Effectively Wild through Hang Up and Listen.
Oh, okay. An even older podcast than this one, though one that is still going, hopefully strong, I hope, and also involves me. So tell us a little bit about your baseball background as a fan or follower of the sport.
So let's see. I grew up in northern Indiana, so I was a Cubs fan. I first got interested actually in sabermetrics just kind of by chance. I happened to be hanging around the mall waiting for my wife, and I went to the to the bookstore in the mall, and they had Bill James's historical baseball abstract, and I just realized there was a lot of interesting stuff in there.
Yeah, so you've been on board for quite a while.
Cool.
And you've witnessed quite an evolution. And are you still a Cubs fan, or are you just sort of a fan of the sport?
I guess I'm more of a Red Sox fan now because I live in the Boston area.
Ah, okay. So you must be torn about the Alex Bregman signing / non-signing. Yeah, one of your teams got him, one of them lost him. I guess you get Bregman either way, so you're happy. Maybe
That's right. Yeah. Plus we have Suarez now. So
yes, that cushions the blow of the departure too. And to the extent that you care to share, what do you do, or where are you located these days?
sure, no problem. Yeah, I live in the Metro Boston area, and I'm a statistician in the pharmaceutical industry.
Wow.
Oh, interesting.
So yeah,
Okay.
I have a PhD in statistics.
Well, I guess that maybe makes sense why Bill James's work appealed to you, or the idea of sabermetrics in general. Right up your alley. So you told me via email that you had a proposal for free agency that you'd care to share. So I don't know what it is, but lay it on us.
Sure. So, okay. So this was kind of coming from my background in pharma. So I was thinking a baseball player is actually kind of like a drug. Let me explain.
Yeah, please do explain. Yeah.
So when a company is developing a drug, they make a very large upfront investment.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
And just like when you sign a free agent contract, you're also making a very large upfront investment, and you being a team, and you know the risks and the rewards are very uncertain, right? So what occurred to me was that, let's say there were, and sometimes companies share the risks, the costs and rewards of developing something. So I was thinking two teams could do the same thing with a player. Like let's say the going rate for a certain free agent is say $300 million. Two teams could split the cost, and then somehow they would have to, of course, split that person's services, like maybe have odd year, even year. Or, I mean, there's a lot of wrinkles to this, I'm sure, that one could criticize. But that was the basic idea, like split the cost and then split the rewards of hiring that player.
Nice. So sort of a free agent timeshare, I guess.
Timeshare, yes, exactly. Yeah, maybe doing alternating years.
I was going to say, it would be interesting to see how this appealed to people. There'd be any number of potential issues, I suppose, but it seems like a young man's endeavor, right? Because if you're like 30 and you're a free agent, I think your team knows that the value you're bringing in the contract may well be concentrated in the first couple of years, like if you sign for 5 years. If you're alternating year after year and you get the like cliff year where the decline really sets in, well, you'd feel pretty annoyed by that, presumably.
Right.
But how would you know? So maybe you could get like a discount. The ratio of the contract could change over time, you know, whereas you get deeper into the I'm trying to make it work.
I guess even if you're trying to sort of hedge against the risk, you'd probably have to pay a premium to get the player to agree to this arrangement, right? Because your typical free agent isn't going to want to do this, right?
Yeah.
And so maybe that kind of undoes whatever you get out of, and you know, I guess you're sort of spreading the risk around, but also the potential reward, because if this guy is good, then you're only having him half the time. And I guess, you'd have to work it out so that the timeshare probably wouldn't be with a division rival. It had to be someone in another league that you don't play as often, or you aren't.
Interesting point.
Yeah. And then, because if you're a free agent, probably, I guess it's sort of a hedge for the player too, in a sense, because if that team tanks, right, if that team stinks or he ends up not liking where he signed or something, then he gets to play somewhere else part of the time, but also seems pretty disruptive just in terms of your personal life. And, you know, you got to maintain multiple residences, and your family is living here 1 year and there another year, and your kids are transferring schools, or who knows, you're kind of commuting. So that seems potentially problematic. So you'd probably have to pay more to get someone to agree to that. And then maybe you're not really reaping any of the rewards of decreased risk that you set out to in the first place.
I wonder if everyone who wanted to do this would end up concentrated with like the Diamondbacks and then the Florida teams. Because it's like, well, if you have to maintain 2 residences, you may as well have one of them be in a place where you might do spring training.
Yeah.
Then you can
Right.
at least stick around.
Or I guess even same city teams that are in different
Right.
leagues, right? You
Yeah.
could Cubs, White Sox, Yankees, Mets, or something that would
Yeah.
be weird.
Although the Yankees would probably just want to buy the whole contract, right?
Maybe not these days.
Yeah,
But,
these Yankees.
I guess the Yankees and the Mets are sharing a lot of players these days. It seems like the Mets keep acquiring ex-Yankees, but yeah, those teams in the same cities, they tend to have a rivalry, even if it's not head-to-head in the standings or in the division. Obviously, you're fighting for fans' affections. And I wonder what that would do to your standing in that city and your fan base, because everyone hates you probably, right? Because you can't have it both ways. You can't kind of play for both sides. I think they would probably, both fan bases would disown you because you have not committed fully to either of them, right?
Yeah.
And so...
Yeah, if they were rivals, I guess that could be problematic.
But otherwise, we don't see any issues.
Yeah, other than
with it.
that, smooth sailing. Yeah, no, there'd be conspiracies about you being some sort of double agent or something.
Right.
It's like you signed with this team and now you're trying to sabotage that other team
Yeah.
on off years.
Well, when I was a teenager, I would. I hope neither sets of my parents are listening to this. If I knew that there was a party I wanted to go to, I would try to be at my dad's house instead of my mom's, because my curfew was an hour and a half later at my dad's than it was at my mom's. So I would like arbitrage curfews. And I don't know what the free agent equivalent of that is, but I feel like there's got to be something, right? When you're trying to game the system. So
facial hair. Well, I guess all the teams allow facial hair now, but
right, yeah.
Otherwise, you could.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
you'd have to grow it and then shave it. And, people like switching up their looks from one year to the next.
Yeah, maybe that's it. Maybe that's the free agent equivalent of wanting to drink, Rainier Tall Boys in Seattle public parks.
Yeah. Or if you're a two-way player, if you're Ohtani, you sign with a team that's renowned for great pitcher development and you pitch for that team and you hit for the other team.
Yeah.
That doesn't really work because he does both in the same game. And also, I
Yeah.
guess he could just sign with the Dodgers, who are believed to be good at both and everything.
Yeah.
So that's maybe more efficient. But yeah, we have considered some hypotheticals in the past that are more along the lines of someone who's just a mercenary and is kind of, hawking their wares, plying their trade from start to start or week to week and just kind of auctioning off their services just sequentially throughout the season. We have an email that's sort of along those lines. But yeah, that idea of just like, well, you could just be a starting pitcher and say, I will start the next game for the highest bidder. And then whoever wants me the most, I will go there. Just, like have glove will travel kind of arrangement. And I remember considering the clubhouse ramifications of that, because you'd never fit in anywhere and everyone would look at you as some kind of carpetbagger wherever you went. And
Mercenary.
yeah, right. So the other thing that occurs to me, though, I guess, is it's not totally unlike developing a drug, right? Because you develop a player. The idea with developing a drug is that you pour a ton of money into the R&D, and then if it's effective, then it's highly lucrative for you, right? As long as you hold the patent or whatever until someone produces the generic version, right? And so the idea is that, well, you maybe want to encourage the companies to pour money into research and development, especially if the government's not going to do it, because that's the only way that you end up with effective therapies. But then the problem is that, of course, maybe those companies want to profit a little too much, and then they end up gouging the intended recipients, et cetera, right? And then maybe you need some price controls on that. Anyway, the point is that that's the model, I guess, is that you spend a lot of money up front because you hope that it will be worth your while in the long run. But that does, I guess, already apply to player development in baseball, right? Because in baseball, you draft a player and you give them a big bonus, and in some cases at least, and then you cultivate their talent as they work their way up through the minors and everything, and you're not really seeing a direct return in those years. But then if they develop into a productive big leaguer, then the whole arbitration free agency system is sort of set up for teams to profit from that for the first several years of that player's career. And I guess when you reach free agency, that's when that wears off for the team. Maybe that's when the generic drug is developed or something, and you lose control of that market maybe. But for the first few years, especially in the pre-arb years, then you're making money hand over fist on that player, and everything that you sunk into their development, if it pans out, you're rewarded, I don't know, 100-fold or something, just because they're giving you so much more production than you could get on the open market for equivalent play. So
that's an interesting point. Yeah. I was definitely thinking of the free agent stage, but I guess there's probably some analogy to make earlier too.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. All right. Well, let's discuss some other interesting hypotheticals. And I guess sticking with the theme, this is sort of a similar question from listener Harry. Subject line, lifelong pillow contract earnings question. And Harry says, the Bregman and Alonso pillow contracts from last year brought up my mind again. By the way, can you call it a pillow contract if it is a multi-year deal and the player ends up opting out? I don't know if I would call that a pure pillow. I guess to me,
I think Bregman's deal is a pillow. Like, it was just understood he was likely to opt out. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But there's at least multi-year potential to it. I kind of think of like the platonic pillow contract being Adrian Beltre with the Red Sox or something, where it's just like you really are signing for 1 year and you're then hoping that it's a soft landing, and then you can parlay that into a bigger long-term deal. Whereas with Bregman or Alonso, there was at least a multi-year pact, and there was pillow potential because you could opt out and capitalize if you had a good year. But if you didn't have a good year, then you would still have some security longer term. So I don't know. I guess it's pillow-ish. It's pillow adjacent. But this is what made Harry ask this question. Some players like Nelson Cruz and Josh Bell seem to get 1-year contracts and play for practically every team at a decent average annual value. Which players have the greatest lifetime earnings getting 1-year contracts for seemingly forever and having a productive career despite not getting that luxurious long-term deal every player strives for? So basically someone who went year by year for their whole career and it actually worked out for them, which I think is also a situation we've considered on the podcast. Like, should more players do that? Because if you bet on yourself and that bet keeps paying off, then it could benefit you, of course. So I put this question to Jeff Houston, who operates COTS Contracts, because I thought he might have some names at hand. And he writes that this is a question perhaps tied to player health. The prime example that comes to mind is Noah Syndergaard, who had 1-year deals throughout his career, even as a free agent. Pitchers have it rough. They do well just to stay healthy for 6 years. 2 other names come to mind, Jeff's mind, that is, but they both got multi-year deals eventually. Edwin Jackson signed a 4-year deal with the Cubs at age 29, but otherwise was year to year while pitching almost everywhere. And, of course, a name familiar to Effectively Wild listeners, and a name that came to my mind as I was reading this question, Rich Hill, signed for 3 years with the Dodgers at age 37, but had 1-year contracts every other year of his career. That probably had a lot to do with his role, starter, reliever, swingman, as well as middling production. How dare you, Jeff? And stuff. How dare you? Double. Another group of perennial candidates for 1-year deals are position players hovering around league average production, often role players. Mike Tauchman seems to be there now. Tommy Pham, Effectively Wild favorite. Gio Urshela, Adam Frazier, Ty France. The one premium player who comes to mind is late model Roger Clemens, who was year to year for the last 5 years of his career in New York and Houston. And yeah, we've talked about that Clemens model, which is almost sort of similar to what you were laying out, John. But yeah, just kind of going year to year and who wants me most and also who will give me the best deal so I don't have to travel more than I want to or whatever. So it is hard to come up with an example of someone who really had a long, lucrative, productive career and never signed a multi-year deal and just went year to year forever. And of course, every player essentially signs a multi-year deal at the beginning of their professional career when they sign their first contract and they're under team control for several years. But even after reaching free agency, it doesn't happen all that often, because if you're really good, then you tend to command a long-term deal at some point. Or if you're healthy, right? So if you're Syndergaard, who obviously was good for a while, but then didn't stay good and got hurt. But if he had continued to pitch at a high level, then maybe he could have signed a long-term deal at some point.
Yeah, I was just thinking there's a certain kind of asymmetry here where like long-term contracts are really more important to the players, right? In the sense that because the player actually has a risk of getting injured, right? It's like, the Yankees or whatever team it is, won't suddenly stop having money, but if the player gets severely injured, they may not be able to play anymore. So I think in general, it's really in the player's interest to have the long-term term contract, no matter how appealing it may be to be open to any bidder every year.
Yeah, and I guess for some of the same reasons we were citing earlier when we were talking about your proposal, is just that it's kind of a pain to move a lot. As Meg and I have remarked often, moving stinks. Even if you're very wealthy and you can afford to streamline that process and have people pack for you and stuff, it's tough to just uproot your life, especially if you have other people in your life who are traveling with you. And so ultimately everyone just does decide to sign that multi-year deal if they can. But it is an intriguing idea of just, no, I'm taking my chances, because of course you could get paid a premium if you just went year to year and you stayed good and stayed available for a really long time. Then you would make much more money than you would otherwise, because obviously there's a trade-off when a team signs you to a long-term deal. They extend a lower average annual value as a consequence of that.
I tend to think that this demonstrates the stabilizing effect of agents, because we don't see guys like wanting to go year to year, but surely in a population of like confident young men, someone out there is like, I want to bet on me every year.
Yeah.
And they don't really do that. I mean, I think that there are times when guys do in a calculated way, and it isn't always bad to take the Pell contract. We see that pay off for guys all the time, but it does come with risk. Obviously, the answer is pretty different for position players versus pitchers too, because if you blow out, what are you going to do?
I hate to invoke the name, but I guess it is relevant here. This is something that a pre-disgraced Trevor Bauer did express a desire to do.
That's right.
It was his intention at one time. I am looking at a tweet from Jeff Passan back in 2018. Trevor Bauer says he's never signing a long-term deal, only one-year contracts. Why? Turns out he made a bet with a friend. If he ever signs a multi-year deal, the friend gets to shoot him in the nuts with a paintball gun from 10 feet away. And you know what? I don't know that many people would be upset if that had happened, knowing what we know about Trevor Bauer. And I guess even Trevor Bauer ultimately did sign a multi-year deal with the Dodgers, right? Which they had reason to regret.
I wonder if his friend collected.
Yeah, I hope so. But, even that deal had opt-outs after the first couple of years, which obviously weren't exercised because Trevor Bauer. But this was something that he expressed a desire to do, having confidence in his ability to, I guess, stay healthy and have his arm be intact. So we'll never know whether he would have stuck to that or whether it would have worked out for him. I assume that eventually someone will come along with the same idea, if not the same rationale, and maybe we'll see whether it works out for them too. But people appreciate security. Now, obviously, given the amount of money that players make these days, you could say that they do have security. They certainly have security as most of us would define financial security. Sure. You sign one-year deal for $20 million or whatever. Most of us would consider that being sort of set for life, right? So if you have made that amount of money, then you could, right? And it's just like, what's the marginal value of the next 20 million or 200 million or whatever it is? So, I could see someone reaching that conclusion and saying, well, I have enough to get by if something goes south. But then again, I guess you could also say, I have enough, and therefore I don't necessarily have to absolutely maximize my earnings at the cost of...
Right, yeah. You don't have to max out every deal necessarily.
Yeah. That said, I think most free agents do, right? Or they try to, right? I mean, it's not common that free agents will take sizable pay cuts or hometown discounts or something. It happens sometimes, but yeah, you could say, why subject myself to the vagaries of health and not knowing where I'm going to play and not being able to plan my personal life long term and everything if it's just a matter of making just unimaginably more money when I already have more than I ever dreamed I would. So
it's funny. People don't really seem to think that way, though, in general.
No, they don't. And I guess that's a part of the way that people who end up with an enormous amount of money end up with an enormous amount of money because they can never get enough. Okay, here is one from listener Matt. I was listening to your conversation about Michael Lorenzen joining the Rockies, and while you two discussed his two-way aspirations and how Colorado was the perfect place to test them, my mind wandered, and how dare you? Your mind wandered while listening to Effectively Wild? Rude. And I began to imagine whether I would want to play for the Rockies. I was usually the worst or one of the worst players on my team at every level, but I nonetheless dreamed of playing in the majors as a little kid. I have no doubt that if I were somehow on the Rockies, I would not only be the worst player in the league, as would likely every Effectively Wild listener, even if I'd probably be worse than most. Hey, I'm sure there are some players who occasionally listen to us. if only the ones who have been on the podcast, they have in a way heard Effectively Wild and listened. But by far the worst MLB player ever, by far. And that would come with a virality and media circus that would likely be pretty unpleasant. But I do wonder if the chance to play ball, to tour every big league city and ballpark, to see the country and meet all these players, if that would be too good to pass up. I also think that while likely most fans and the Stephen A. Smith types would roast me, if he, bothered to talk about baseball, which doesn't happen all that often, there would be a contingent rooting for the everyday schlub, as my partner put it. Years ago, I remember Sam and Ben discussing the war of a random person playing in the majors, but mine is a more personal and emotional question. Would you knowingly be by far the worst big leaguer ever and step into that media circus and infamy for the chance to chase the dream? I think this is something Sam and I considered at some point in ancient Effectively Wild history as well. And I know Sam wrote about it for ESPN and about whether you should want to do this. And I think he concluded no. But what do you think, John? Would you want to be the worst MLB player ever?
I guess it depends on how much of your self-esteem depends on your athletic performance. Yeah. I don't really think of myself as a jock. So being like the worst MLB player ever might be a step up, I guess. Or just, it might be just kind of fun, but I could see I don't know, if someone was had a pretty good, solid high school or college career who, maybe takes pride in being a good athlete, then that'd be pretty deflating.
Mm-hmm.
I like the idea of stepping into a scrum of reporters and they're trying to find a tactful way to be like, so, hey, you were really bad tonight. What do you think about that? And you're just like, I'm doing great. You should see me tonight compared to high school. I'm on the up and up.
Yeah, it's really bad tonight. I'm terrible every night. What are you talking about? You're surprised? Yeah, but
doesn't get better than this, baby.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I would not want to do this. No. I mean, for one thing, I never really had aspirations of playing. I never dreamed of playing, maybe partly because I was just realistic, but also because I didn't really want that lifestyle. Maybe that sounds hard to believe, but there's so much that goes along with being a professional athlete that doesn't really appeal to me. Obviously, there are a lot of aspects of it that do sound appealing, the aforementioned mega contracts that we were just talking about, but no, I guess I never really loved playing enough to want to do that at that level because, I was an okay baseball player and I stopped playing before I was forced to, they didn't tear the uniform off my back. I didn't get to the point where people were even throwing hard enough or throwing nasty enough pitches that I realized I couldn't hit them. So it wasn't that so much.
Got to retire at the right time.
Yeah, I walked away on my own terms, which was just I have to go to practice on the weekend? No, thanks. I'd rather play video games or read a book or something. So, much as I liked playing and still like playing in an informal fashion and just meeting up with friends or something, but the competitive aspect of it never really appealed to me. So I didn't really want to test my mettle and my might on the field exactly. I kind of like just playing recreationally. So I did not have the eye of the tiger when it came to kind of playing sports. I had fun, I just like a laid back game where everyone has fun. So I don't have the pro athlete mentality, let alone the talent. Yeah. And yeah, if I were to do this, it would feel and be entirely unearned, obviously. So I wouldn't feel as if I had accomplished anything, right? Like none of the cachet that comes along with being a big leaguer, there's a reason why that's sort of a high status job, because it's so hard to do and you have to make so many sacrifices to do it, and you have to be part of the 0.001 or whatever % of the population that has the skill and works hard enough to do it and everything. And so if you just skip everything and just somehow, I don't know if it's like a pay to play scheme or what, you just get to do this for whatever reason, then I don't think any of the typical benefits would be conferred upon you, and it would just be almost all downside, I think. I don't really know that it would actually be that pleasurable a pastime for you.
I guess I could see this being kind of like a fantasy camp scenario, where we're just sitting on the bench for a week or something, but...
Okay, yeah, sure. Like just kind of getting to live the big league lifestyle without actually playing, like you're just kind of...
You get to hang out.
Yeah. You get to hang with the players, you get to travel with the players, live in big league luxury, get to know them. That I could see being appealing, maybe, and that is, I guess, why they offer fantasy camps and stuff like that, and why you can kind of do that if you want to with former players or whatever, and you can sort of indulge that dream without the downsides because there aren't such stakes. Because I don't think there would be a very big contingent rooting for this person, because I think it would be seen as a very self-centered, selfish activity. I mean, maybe for a game or something, it would be interesting just sort of as an experiment to see like how bad an average person would be. And maybe it would be kind of relatable to sort of see yourself in that player. And, you're the ultimate underdog, I guess, except that you're not really, because you're kind of like privileged, you're jumped up, you're placed in this position without having done anything to deserve it. So I don't think anyone really would be rooting for you. They would just be like, stop hogging the spotlight. Especially fans of the team would hate you, right? Like
especially if you hurt the team, right?
Yeah,
like
exactly.
Imagine if it was like the final out of the game,
Right, yeah. Glad you get to live your dream here. Meanwhile, you just made us lose. So thanks a lot. Yeah, no, even if you were one of the fans, I think they would quickly turn on you because you made it all about you. And in a way, it's being a bad fan because you're tanking the team's fortunes. You're sabotaging the team for your own personal pleasure and gain.
I could imagine, like, if other people don't know, right? If they think that you just got there somehow and you didn't insist on playing and you knew things, like, what if you were you and you had like an understanding of sabermetrics and you had some statistical acumen and you're just like hanging in the dugout? Well, maybe could you play badly enough, but in a small enough dose that they're like, well, we don't want them on the team, but maybe they should be a coach. Like, could you parlay it into a useful bit of business with the team? You wouldn't be making big league money anymore, but that might be okay. Like, maybe you just want to be around,
Maybe. Yeah. Although I think you kind of have to like earn your spot sort of. So you're right. If you have actual wisdom to impart and you're contributing in some way, you're giving and not just taking, then I think your presence could be tolerated or welcomed. But well, that actually reminds me, Sam and I sort of had this opportunity, not in the majors, but in the Pacific Association. And it is definitely something we talked about just in order to basically get a baseball reference page for us, because like, if we had just inserted ourselves into a 2015 Sonoma Stompers game, we'd be on Baseball Reference. And wouldn't that be kind of cool? And we could have done it. It could have been like, do it for the story, do it for the book, and see what it's like. And there would be something nice about being memorialized in all the baseball databases, and to like be part of the MLB record in some way if you did that in the majors. And we could have done it in some low stakes end of season game in a blowout or something. And we could have just thrown one pitch or stood in left field for a batter or something, probably unobtrusive. And we could have entered ourselves into the official record of professional baseball. And that was sort of tempting. But we didn't do it for, I think, all these reasons that I'm laying out there, because I think the players would have resented it, even if it was late in the season after they had gotten to know us and everything. I think there was still sort of a divide where it was tough enough for us to justify our place in the dugout or in the clubhouse. If we had then crossed over onto the field, then I think that would have been seen as just intrusive and just kind of know your place nerd, and like, this is our province.
I guess it's kind of a stolen valor thing,
yeah, exactly.
It's like,
right.
Why are you pitting on that medal? You didn't earn it. Yeah.
Yes, and I think part of our calculus, the case that we made to the players, was kind of what you were just saying, Meg, that we can actually help you. We can obtain all this technology and we can get video and we can show you replays and we can give you data and we can help. We can actually be part of this effort in some way. And I don't think that we could have justified that we were helping anyone or anything if we had inserted ourselves into a game. And so that just would have undercut our message and would have made them question all of our motives, really. And it would have been sort of a sideshow. And even for the purposes of the book and sort of, hey, what if we were able to run a team and we did all these things that we thought were smart and would help the team be better? We could not have made the case that playing personally would make the team better. So I think it would have been kind of hypocritical. And even if you did this in the majors just to do it for the story and to get your photo and to get your baseball reference page and your FanGraphs page and all the rest, I think it would be almost like it would hang around my neck. It would be like I might be more ashamed of it than I was.
You're taking
proud
somebody's
of it.
spot. You know?
Oh, right. There's the roster consideration too.
Right. Some young guy has been working his whole life and you're just hanging out. To what? Make money? I shouldn't have said so confidently that you guys would have hurt the team with your own athleticism. I didn't mean anything by it, Ben. I wasn't trying to be a jerk.
Yeah. Well, I think, and the reason why it's so seductive, the idea of, we could have our own player page, is because it's meaningful to have your own player page, because you have to actually earn it usually to get that. And it signifies something about everything that you did to get to that point. And so if you just cut all the corners and skipped straight past that process, then it would not actually mean what it means to everyone else. When we do our Meet a Major Leaguer segment, it's predicated on the idea that just being a big leaguer, however briefly, and even if you don't play well, it's still an incredible accomplishment that is limited to a small group of people in the history of humanity. And so it would water down the honor if we gave it to ourselves, essentially. Now, if we could somehow separate all of these consequences from it and just simulate the experience, absolutely. If we're on the holodeck, if this is just like a VR simulation or something of being a big leaguer, then by all means, that would be, it might also be sort of scary to actually stand in there and face Major League pitching and everything.
Yeah.
That might not actually be as fun as it sounds. It might be humbling and terrifying. But that I would do to get a sense of what that would feel like without all of the associated downsides.
I have two thoughts about that. The first is that I am like highly embarrassable. And so the notion of doing this and in front of people on TV, absolutely not. Also, if you come up with holodeck technology, I don't think you have to worry about making big league money. You got a great side biz, that's a good secondary hustle. You got a holodeck? Oh my God.
Yeah, you have actually made the metaverse happen. But often the holodeck just goes haywire, and that leads to its own problems. Not always, no. So yes, that's low stakes scenario where we could simulate it, get a taste, but without the bitter aftertaste. I'd absolutely be into that. But in real life, no. But I don't think anyone's offering anyway.
I guess the holodeck could also simulate all the like social advantages of being a major leaguer and getting the adoration and so forth.
Yeah, right. I guess if you just want to inflate your own ego, you
Have
can.
an AI girlfriend.
Yeah, you can simulate being a sports superstar and all the adulation that goes along with that. Yeah, well, whatever floats your boat, I guess, as long as no one's being harmed. But sometimes people are harmed by the holodeck. It's a problem. Okay, here's a question from Philip.
It's a problem, you know? How you're always hearing about it being a problem, the holodeck.
What percentage of holodeck-centric Star Trek episodes has it been a problem? A significant percentage.
Yeah, when it is the A plot, it tends to be something's gone wrong, or like
it could be a harmless mystery or something, but also sometimes things go wrong. Okay.
those guys took over the ship. They made the whole
Yeah.
ship a holodeck. That was on Voyager.
Yep, just institutional hazard. All right. Fellow Patreon supporter Philip says, a question I've been pondering. Baseball people consistently give extra credit or special attention to switch hitters when they are good, implicitly because they are good, despite doing such a hard thing. This doesn't make sense to me. Switch hitting is a choice a player makes to gain an advantage, i.e. the platoon advantage. It is one of the ways to try to be good, like opting for a lift and pull approach or going for an all fields approach, etc. I don't think we gave, for example, Prime Joey Votto extra credit for choosing to try to succeed by being so picky with swing choices. If anything, people took away credit from Joey Votto for doing that. Why do we do it for switch hitters? Switch hitting is extremely hard to be good at, but no one is forced to do it. This isn't some Mike Trout forced debilitation scenario after all. Is this just about the advantages it affords lineup construction? Is this take way off? Literally everyone I discuss this with thinks so. And accordingly, I love that Philip still had the
It's like, I'm going to try one more time.
Yeah.
Maybe these are a bunch of weirdos. They
people
want to
agree with
hit
the
on the
take.
field.
I kind of appreciate the kind of reductionism of this. I mean, if I understand correctly, I mean, I guess at some point you could say, well, the value of anything a baseball player does is just WAR, and, you know, we shouldn't really give them extra credit for flexibility. You should just look at, you know, how much value they're bringing. But that seems kind of boring if you think of it that way. Like, I think it's good to give extra credit for being, you know, different.
Yeah, so Philip says that literally everyone he discusses this with thinks that his take is way off, and so accordingly, I will give one or both of you money to grant some legitimacy to this question. And I guess he has by supporting us on Patreon, and
thank you so much.
We have now aired it on the podcast. So I don't know whether that grants it legitimacy or not. Not unreasonable, I guess, to think that we would respond positively to a question that everyone else in Philip's life has condemned. That's probably pretty routine, I would guess. But I probably have to side with the mob here, Philip.
Yeah.
Well, I don't. Maybe it's just a semantic thing, because Philip is conceding that being a switch hitter is hard.
Yeah.
But then he's saying that doesn't make it more impressive, I guess, when a switch hitter succeeds, essentially. I see what he's saying here, right? Because it is very hard to switch hit at a major league level. And so I think it makes sense to be impressed by that. I am impressed by that because, you know, not that I could actually hit at a major league level with my dominant side either, but, you know, to think of doing it with the other side is even more inconceivable. So physically, I think it is more challenging, and there's a even smaller group of people who could make that work. But it is true that if you can make it work, it makes your job easier in Major League Baseball, right? So I don't disagree with that.
It makes keeping your job easier in Major League Baseball. It's still incredibly hard.
Yes, it is. Yes, it's hard to maintain two swings and everything.
Yeah. In fact, we spend more time these days, I think, encouraging guys to stop switch hitting than we do praising the ones who are good at it, because often there's just like a noticeable and meaningful gap in how good they are from one side of the plate versus the other. And they might be able to do better by just committing to the one side and swinging from there more often. Yeah. Even with the platoon disadvantage or what have you. But part of this maybe goes back to my instincts around the prior question, which is it's just so amazing to me that anyone can do any of this well, because I can't, which is part of why I would be so embarrassable if I were put in a big league uniform. I'd be like, this is going to be a really bad day at work every day for so many days. That's the other part of it that would be terrible. It's just like you're there for so long. Just being the worst at your job every day. That would be terrible. Maybe part of the issue is that I don't like think about it as it being something that's like commendable, right? It's not virtuous. It's impressive, right? Maybe that's where I'm getting kind of tripped up in the question, where it's like, well, we're applauding them for the skill. We're not applauding them because they're like, I mean, I guess we do. We applaud them to some degree because they're doing the difficult thing twice and in a way that not everyone can do. But it's not a virtue question. Like we wouldn't be like, oh, that's not impressive if a pitcher added a fourth pitch to their repertoire. We wouldn't be like, well, you're only doing that because it's valuable. It's like, well, yeah, but
right.
But
that's true.
Then it is valuable. You know what I mean? So it's just like, I'm sorry to leave you on an island. It can still that you have found no one that backs up your perspective. And I think you're right that this is maybe just a semantic difference, which in that case, perfect podcast to send it to again, you know, like
probably,
you did well both times.
But it is true that if you have the capacity to switch hit, every switch hitter has the option to stop switch hitting.
Sure.
And some of them do, and maybe some of them who don't should, but they all could, and they opt not to because they think that switch hitting gives them advantages. It makes it easier for them, right? I mean, it confers a platoon advantage upon them, and they pursue that advantage because it's easier to hit opposite-handed pitching. And so, yes, it is harder to maybe maintain multiple swings and have different vantage points and everything, but on balance, they think that they are better at baseball, or that baseball is easier for them.
I just don't know that they are thinking about it in terms of it being easier. Right? They're thinking about it
in terms of being an advantage, I think. Right. Yeah.
But I don't know that they're like, oh, it's easier. I think they're still like, this is still really freaking hard. But I'm able to do it well from both sides. I don't know. Maybe we need to call Brent Rooker and be like, do people talk about switch hitters as if it's easier?
Yeah.
I'm just thinking of big leaguers we talk to every now and again, you know?
I mean, this seems like just a variation on the Shohei Ohtani question, right? It's like, should we be impressed by him being a two-way player, you know, in addition to, you know, like it's like Shohei Ohtani versus like Aaron Judge or something, right?
Right. Yeah. I maybe we don't disagree with Philip. It's, as you said, it's John. It's not like we're giving more credit to switch hitters in WAR or something. And there is just an inherent advantage for certain types of players in Major League Baseball. That's why lefties are so overrepresented.
That's why guys try to hit left-handed.
Yeah, right, because you get the platoon advantage most of the time. Of course, if you're a lefty position player, there are certain positions that you can't play as easily or aren't allowed to play, but you get the platoon advantage more often. And if you're a lefty pitcher, then you get an advantage. There's a familiarity effect or lack of familiarity effect, and you can get by with lesser stuff or speed, a la Ranger Suarez, for instance, maybe. You know, that plays up a bit because he's a lefty, and you just still see fewer lefties, even though you see many more lefties in the majors than you do in the general population. So maybe I kind of agree with Philip, but
what, Ben?
I kind of like. I
no,
think,
you don't. You're just being contrary.
I think because he is conceding that switch hitting is extremely hard to be good at, and that it's impressive that they're good at that thing, which I think we would all agree about. But then, if you are good at that thing, then it doesn't actually make it, because like some players are actually naturally ambidextrous, or at least, you know, when their brains were plastic enough to sort of pick up being proficient with multiple hands, you know, whatever their parents coached them to do that or something. And so to them, maybe by that point, it is sort of second nature. And so they are continuing to do it because it gives them an advantage. And so, like, for instance, when we talk about Cal Raleigh's 2025 season, and we talk about all of the home run records he set. And he set the Mariners franchise home run record, and he set the catcher home run record, multiple catcher home run records. You know, people who were actually playing catcher when they hit the home run, or players who played catcher a majority of the time in the season when they were hitting the home runs. And he also set the home run record for switch hitters. He broke Mickey Mantle's record. And, you know, that was cited as an impressive thing, right? But I think it's far more impressive that he hit the most home runs as a catcher, because that makes it harder to hit home runs, because like you don't play as much because wear and tear, at least for most catchers. Cal Raleigh just plays anyway. And, you know, it just takes a toll on you physically, and there's such a defensive load, and you're expected to devote so much of your attention to preparing to work with your pitchers and all of that. That makes it harder to hit home runs. But his being a switch hitter doesn't make it harder for him to hit home runs, right? It makes it, if anything, easier for him to hit home runs, given that he has the talent to be a switch hitter, which he does, right? So I do think it's sort of a semantic thing. And, you know, it's like there aren't that many switch hitters these days. There are fewer than there have been at various periods. And so maybe that suggests that it really is hard to not specialize, to be a generalist, to hit from both sides, to swing both ways, as they say in this context and only this context. And so maybe that makes it more impressive, but also once you make it as a switch hitter, then I'm sympathetic to the argument that it's actually all upside. You know, it's just like it helps you, right? So it's not an impediment if you are able to conquer that initial obstacle of just most people not being ambidextrous. So I sort of think we're saying the same thing ultimately. I'm not sure that we're actually disagreeing, or that the people who are disagreeing with Philip are actually disagreeing with him. I don't know.
I think I forgot what the question was by now.
I think I'm disagreeing with him. I also want to clarify, just to head off potential email. I know that Brent Rooker isn't a switch hitter.
Yes,
okay?
right.
Just in case anyone is confused.
He could comment on the perception of switch hitters. Yeah.
Right. I just want him, I would just ask him, because one, we talk to him every now and again. And two, it's good to have topics to bring to him that aren't, hey, how do you feel about haunted pools?
Right.
So just everyone, I know, right-handed hitter, right-handed. Very good. Very good at that.
And I'm sure
not a switch
he'd be
hitter.
pretty impressed by switch hitting, because he doesn't do it and probably couldn't. So, yeah, I think it's both very impressive and also, in a sense, not impressive.
It's just such a bananas thing to say. I can tell that you feel bonkers saying it based on how you're saying it.
I know what Philip means.
I know what he means, but I'm inviting him to not split the hair, because I think
it's the opposite of like hitting with one hand tied behind your back. It's like you get an extra hand, and I know that that's hard for most people. But for switch hitters, it would be like if you viewed it as getting an extra hand and you had grown the hand after not having it. Well, it's hard to make it to the majors as a switch hitter, right? But then once you have made the majors as a switch hitter, it's an advantage. Like, well, sure, it's an advantage. Oh my God, this is is that not tearing the podcast that's all Philip apart? Is saying. I don't know. I don't know what if he's arguing. It is an advantage, but it's still impressive. Yeah, even though it's an advantage, it can be both. Being a big league caliber player is an advantage in the major leagues. Of course, extra, but it's still impressive. Yes, but it does tilt the playing field in your favor once you're in the majors, right? Because first of all, okay. How much time we don't need to spend any more time on this question.
I guess the question is, does being good at something, is that admirable inherently? I don't know. It's like, obviously you're good at it. So, I mean, do people have to admire you or not? I don't know. Again,
I think that the admirable is the wrong, it's just not the word that I use to describe like a big leaguer being a good big leaguer. It's not admirable. It's impressive. Those are different. It's not like a virtue question. Right. Let's move on to a different one.
Yes. I think switch hitters deserve special attention, regardless of where we come down on this question. I think it's fair to focus on them. Maybe not as much as we have in this episode, but yeah, they're fairly rare and getting rarer, and it's a very difficult thing to do or to get to the big leagues and be able to do. So I think that they deserve all the attention they get and the mystique of the switch hitter. But I don't know. I guess I'm sort of sympathetic to the idea that, like, all right, we'll move on. Okay, so here's a question from Orion, also a Patreon supporter, who says, I'd be interested in seeing a recalculation of WAR and the various plus index stats without the PED guys. I don't think it needs to be authoritative, but it would be an interesting tool to evaluate for Hall of Fame ballot purposes. So Orion wants to essentially strip out all of the PD guys, quote unquote, and recalculate all the stats to essentially have kind of a clean players only baseline that we could use to compare other players to.
Are we assuming we know who the PD guys are?
Right, this is the thing.
There's the rub. Yeah. Yeah, so I guess I agree that if we could do this in any sort of rigorous way, it would be interesting. It'd be a useful rubric to have. If anything, I'd be curious to see whether it even changes the stats one way or another, because I'm not convinced that it would. Of course, we know that there are certain players who are tied to PEDs who have been great players, and removing them from the sample would make everyone else look better. But there are also many fringy marginal players who have taken PEDs. And so I think we'd probably be surprised by how much this would move the numbers, or how little, I guess. Because, yeah, it's like, which PED guys? Is it only the ones who were good, or also the ones who were unspectacular? And then you could never do it in practice, because what about the presumably many players who were never implicated for their PED use? So it's a selective sample if you're only stripping out the ones we know did something. And then even if you're stripping out the ones we know did something, which seasons are you stripping from the sample? Are you trying to say this is when he started juicing and before that he was clean and we can include him? And, you know, the lines there are rarely very clear. So I think if you removed only confirmed periods of PED use, it would not make much of a difference to the league-wide baselines, really. And I'm unconvinced that the juice, so to speak, would be worth the squeeze in terms of how much it would affect other players' statistical cases.
I agree.
Yeah, no, I would just add, you don't want to bias the stats by like only taking out good seasons, right? Like if you say, you know, Barry Bonds was obviously juicy when he hit 70 home runs, but you know, not when he had less, you know, impressive performance, then you're biasing the sample.
Yeah, and the confirmed PD players, if you take the upper estimates of people who have said, 50% of players were on something or whatever, well, we know a very small portion of those. Even if you just took every name in the Mitchell report, or that reportedly failed the tests that were supposed to be anonymous, or whatever else, it would be such a small number of players that in the grand scheme of things, I don't think it would budge the baselines all that much, really. But, I'm sure it would, if you could do it somehow, if you had perfect all-knowing like information about who did what and when, and you could somehow remove that, I'd be interested, of course, in seeing just like whether that even makes the quote-unquote clean players more impressive, whether the PEDs work as well as people generally assume that they did. You might find that the effects were overrated in most cases, if not in individual cases. So yeah, that's a problem. Like that's a bigger problem than the holodeck, to try to untangle who was clean and who juiced and what sort of effects that it had. So that's a tough one.
Yeah, agreed.
Well, since we're talking about Star Trek, shall we talk about the GOAT baseball player in Star Trek lore, the great Buck Buckeye? This is a question from Matt. Buck Buckeye may have been invoked on this podcast previously, I think, but Matt says, my partner and I are rewatching Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and last night we watched If Wishes Were Horses, which introduces Buck Buckeye, star third baseman for the 2042 London Kings, and in Captain Sisko's words, the greatest that ever played. But in the episode, they also say that he hit 20 home runs from the right side, his dominant and power side. Uh-oh, this is going to lead to another switch hitter debate. In his first 3 seasons, and then only 10 home runs or fewer per season after that, supposedly because his manager, Old Crow, moved him to second in the lineup. These stats are fine and all, but nothing special. So my question is this: how good would Buck Buckeye have to be at everything but power hitting to actually be the greatest of all time? And Matt lays out the following tidbits that we have about his career. His rookie season was 2015 when he was 17 years old. His final season was 2042 when he was 44. He claims he had 5 good years left in him, but the Planetary Baseball League folded after the 42 season. Maybe all players think they have a little left in the tank, but Captain Sisko seems to believe this is the reason why Buckeye was actually the greatest, suggesting that he didn't actually surpass Ruth, Bonds, Mays, and War, but maybe was on pace to. Of course, Bonds, speaking of PD players, he may have had more good years than him too, but he was not extended an invitation to play for additional years. His power was far better from the right side. He hit 20 home runs as a righty his first 3 seasons. He hit 10 home runs or fewer total every subsequent season. He broke Joe DiMaggio's hit streak record in 2026. He was not a two-way player. He transitioned from shortstop to third base in 2032. In If Wishes Were Horses, he appears as his 2042 self and has a Babe Ruth build. I guess a older Babe Ruth build. He's kind of tubby, Matt says. So my question is this: can we cobble together a player profile in a lab that is all of the things above and has a case for the GOAT? He did play 27 seasons, so that's a good start.
Well, I mean, off the top, a player who always got on base would be incredibly valuable, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yes. So if he broke DiMaggio's hit streak record, I think probably safe to assume that he was a high average hitter, or it would be even more improbable that he would do that. So high average hitter, high on base guy, maybe he took tons of walks. And if he played shortstop for the majority of his career, now, I guess maybe the fact that he transitioned from short to third in 2032 when he would have been, well, let's see, I guess if he was 44 in 2042, then he would have been 34 when he moved off short, which, that's not abnormal at all. But if he were like a generational shortstop wizard, like the Wizard, Ozzie Smith or something, then, or Hannes Wagner or whatever, then maybe he could have just stuck at short into his late 30s or 40s or so. Maybe that tells you something about his proficiency at short. But even if he was, a pretty good shortstop and he was an extremely high average, high on base hitter, and, maybe he was a good base runner, base stealer, et cetera, I think, he could be the GOAT, right? You could. I mean, it's tough, right? Because, it's tough to accrue the war totals that Mays or Bonds or Ruth or Aaron or these guys did. If you don't hit for power, that's hard. But most of those guys also weren't defensively elite. At least a lot of those guys weren't, or they didn't play premium defensive positions. Maybe Mays is an exception, though, the stats kind of differ on his center field play beyond a certain point. So yeah, like you could be a shortstop and play for an extremely long time and theoretically rack up the kind of value that, a corner outfielder did, despite him hitting for far more power than you.
I'm actually more intrigued about the Planetary Baseball League. If you think about like different forces of gravity, different atmospheric pressure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was covered, I guess, in some of our future blasts on past episodes. But yeah, the Planetary Baseball League has a fairly concise entry, actually, on Memory Alpha, the Star Trek wiki. All it says is that the Planetary Baseball League was a baseball league and division of Major League Baseball, which had teams across Earth in the early 21st century. They were officially related to Planetary Baseball League, Inc. A notable player was Buck Buckeye, who stayed with the league for over 20 years. that's about all it says. And then it just lists some of the teams, including the Gotham City Bats, the London Kings, the Crenshaw Monarchs. There was a team in Cebu in Japan, as there is now, and a team in Tanis. So that's all we know about the Planetary Baseball League, I guess, from the Star Trek lore. But feel free to let your imagination run wild.
I will.
Yeah. I mean, we know that World War III arrived and interfered with baseball, I guess. Yeah. So, that's certainly an impediment to the sport continuing to survive and thrive. And of course, World War III, I'm sorry to break it to everyone, but arrived in 2026, I believe, in the Star Trek timeline, and persisted for decades. So that's something to look forward to, I guess.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Not entirely unrealistic, I suppose, but neither is Buck Buckeye. I think, I'll back up Ben Sisko here. I think that Buck Buckeye could have been the GOAT. Now, it is entirely possible that Ben Sisko was just sort of like, old school fan, despite living in the future and valued. I mean, we know he's kind of like an old school thinker. He has a baseball, just the fact that he still cares about baseball and values it and knows, is sort of a scholar of the sport, which is kind of common to Star Trek captains. But as has been discussed on this podcast, I think in the past, it sort of makes sense that Star Trek captains would be geeks who are like into the past and stuff. Probably that profession perhaps selects for that sort of knowledge and interest. So it is possible that Ben Sisko does not have a great handle on the value of baseball players, and that, maybe centuries on, some of the sabermetric lore has been lost, perhaps. But if Buck Buckeye was perceived as a great in his day, I guess that's maybe a little unclear. So it's not totally settled, I suppose, whether this is a contrarian take from Ben Sisko or whether this is kind of the consensus. And so it's possible that, he just has a personal affection for Buck Buckeye and the type of player he was that isn't really reflective of his actually deserving the title of GOAT.
Now I'm thinking of like all of the terabytes of data they would have, decades from now, there'd be so much information about players. But
is there FanGraphs in Star Trek?
Yeah, well, there's, no Planetary Baseball League, I guess, at that stage. But I'm sure that there was a Star Trek equivalent of FanGraphs prior to the demise of the sport. But I guess what we're saying is that player profile does not contradict Benjamin Sisko's interpretation of Buck Buckeye's value. You absolutely could come up with a player who satisfies all of those criteria and was the greatest of all time. It would be an unusual player profile, but maybe that would make it all the more interesting and impressive and likely to be loved and lauded by Ben Sisko centuries later. Okay. Well, there's plenty of baseball content in Star Trek, of course, and it's a baseball show and a baseball franchise, and if you want to unite baseball and the holodeck aforementioned on this episode, then there is, of course, an episode for you. Take me out to the holodeck. Right. And in fact, Michael Bauman and I did, or the Holo Suite, sorry. But that was a Deep Space Nine episode in the 7th season that Michael Bauman and I did an episode of the Ringer MLB show about for Space Week at the Ringer, I think. And we had a guest in an interview and we talked about the making of that episode. And I assume that's still available somewhere. If I can find it, I will link to it on the show page. Okay. Well, this probably went in a whole lot of directions you didn't anticipate, John.
It was fun.
I'm glad. And I guess you anticipate the unanticipatable when you appear on this podcast, probably. Anything you would care to plug before we let you go?
I'm going to plug the scientific method. I think it needs more respect. It's been working well for 400 years or so. So
yeah,
I endorse it.
I do too.
Yeah.
Co-sign scientific method. Yeah. a lot of upsides to the scientific method. We should use that. We should continue to trust that, I think. Good idea.
That's right.
Well, I was interested. The Patreon people who appear on the podcast, rarely is the plug or promotion that they do self-serving,
Yeah.
It very rarely is it like, check out this project of mine, which is fine if that's what you...
totally fine.
Yeah, you're welcome to. But so often it is something selfless, or people just promote this podcast, or an abstract concept like the scientific method. So I appreciate that. Well, John, thank you for listening for not quite 15 years, but, 13 and counting. And hopefully we'll all get to 15 together. Appreciate your support and your time today.
Sounds good.
Well, one guy who will not be going to the AL East, Kyle Daniel Tucker, who, after we recorded this episode, signed with, you'll never guess, the Los Angeles Dodgers. Sort of saw that one coming. Kind of called it last week. It's a 4-year, $240 million contract. Those are the top line numbers, at least, with opt-outs. A possibly decisive blow in the free agent contracts over-under draft. But that's probably not the number one takeaway for most people who are listening to this. We will, of course, dive deep into all of the implications next time. Happy 29th birthday to you, Kyle Tucker. He'll turn 29 on Saturday. A much wealthier man than he was when he turned 28. All right, an important pedantic correction from Patreon supporter Bohan, who says, I have a follow-up on the narwhal follow-up. It's a pedantic note, but I figure you'd be happy to be pedantic about animals as well. Ben mentioned the narwhal's tusk coming from its nose, but it's actually a modified canine tooth, and it emerges from male, and in rare instances, female narwhal's upper lip. So I suppose it is, in fact, a literal stiff upper lip. Thank you for that important clarification, and thanks for your Patreon support, which any listener is welcome and encouraged to provide by going to patreon.com/effectivelywild and signing up to pledge some monthly or yearly amount to help keep the podcast going, help us stay ad-free, and get yourself access to some perks. As have the following 5 listeners: Jonathan Barra, Dan Valenzola, Bradley Ruffin, Stacy E., and Scott Sorbella. Thanks to all of you. Patreon perks include, well, potential podcast appearances, as you just heard. And as you also just heard, shout-outs at the end of episodes, as well as monthly bonus episodes, access to the Effectively Wild Discord group for patrons only, prioritized email answers, playoff live streams, personalized messages, discounts on merch and ad-free FanGraphs memberships, and so much more. Check out all the offerings at patreon.com/effectivelywild. If you are a Patreon supporter, you can message us through the Patreon site. If not, you can contact us via email. Send your questions, comments, intro and outro themes to podcast@fangraphs.com. You can rate, review, and subscribe to Effectively Wild on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, and other podcast platforms. You can join our Facebook group at facebook.com/group/effectivelywild. You can find the Effectively Wild subreddit at r/effectivelywild. And you can check the show notes in the podcast post at FanGraphs or the episode description in your podcast app for links to the stories and stats we cited today. Thanks to Shane McKeon for his editing and production assistance. We will be back with one more episode before the end of the week, which is fast approaching, and therefore, we will talk to you soon.